Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to episode 9 of Voiceover Histories. I'm Katie Aitken, and this is the docu-series that shines a light on the people, the projects, and the stories from the voiceover industry of days gone by. In this episode, we're behind the mic again to discover another voiceover legend, the woman known as the Cartoon Queen and the First Lady of Animated Voices, June Foray. Foray's impressive 8-decade-spanning career, as well as her advocacy efforts and achievements outside of the recording booth, prove that she truly dedicated her life to animation, and explains why her legacy lives on as one of the absolute greats in the industry. As you might have guessed, in having a career that spans 8 decades, June Foray was very young when she started out in voice acting. As a child growing up in Springfield, Massachusetts, she knew she wanted to be a performer. Encouraged by her supportive parents, she eventually started seeing acting coaches, one of whom happened to have their own radio show. So, in 1929, with Foray aged just 12 years old, she landed her first role, playing the character of an elderly woman on a radio drama show. In fact, Foray would later recall that she voiced that character very similarly to how she performed one of her later, more iconic characters, Granny in Looney Tunes. In the mid-1930s, when Foray was 17 years old, she and her family moved to LA, where she continued working on the radio. The golden age of American radio really spanned the 1930s, 40s, and into the 50s, and Foray was there for it. By the late 1930s, Foray had her own radio show, Lady Make-Believe, which she both wrote and starred in.
Hello there, boys and girls. This is Lady Make-Believe. Did you ever go into a library some rainy afternoon and read so many stories that all the storybook people got mixed up and you didn't know where each one belonged? Well,
having her own radio show led to further voice work in various other shows, such as the Lux Radio Theatre, but also caught the attention of Capitol Records, who hired her to work on children's albums. This, in turn, brought her to the attention of animation producers. It was in the 1940s that June Foray started lending her voice to animation, the medium she's best remembered for. Her earliest work in animation touched on some of the impressive classics that her name would later become synonymous with. She did a handful of jobs working with huge studios, such as Leon Schlesinger Studios, which would of course go on to become Warner Brothers, alongside the likes of Mel Blanc, and even voicing high-profile characters such as Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. However, most of her animation voiceover work in the 40s was spent working on a series of short films called Speaking of Animals.
The age-old title of King of Beasts that the lion enjoys is not based on pure fact. The massive elephant doesn't fear the lion. Nevertheless, this powerful killer's blood-curdling roar strikes a note of stark terror throughout the jungle.
Ah, shut up, you big windbag.
Okay, anything you say, Poopsie.
There were 50 of these shorts made between 1941 and 1949, which showed live footage of animals, but with rotoscoped mouth movements, which made it look like the animals were talking. This multi-award-winning series, created by Tex Avery, featured talents provided by a multitude of voiceover icons of the day, such as Daws Butler, Billy Bletcher, Mel Blanc, Pinto Colvig, and of course, June Foray, who voiced various animals in about 18 of these 50 shorts. It was the following decade where Foray's animation voice work really took off. She kicked 1950 off by working with Disney on Cinderella, playing a small but wonderfully memorable character.
so I guess Disney heard me doing witches and animals and little girls and boys and princesses, and they hired me to do Lucifer the Cat in Cinderella.
This performance is what Foray often referred to as her first animation role. A couple of years later, she would work on another Disney production, the animated short Trick or Treat, in which she played Witch Hazel. And then another couple of years later, she voiced a mermaid in Peter Pan. Aside from her work with Disney, Foray also began voicing one of her most popular characters in the 1950s, Granny. In 1950, she first voiced Granny for Capitol Records, and then began voicing her in animation in 1955, taking over the role from voice actress Bea Benaderet. Foray and Benaderet's voice acting paths would cross again at the end of the 1950s. In 1959, June Foray auditioned and did in fact play Betty Rubble in the pilot episode of The Flintstones.
Wilma, when are we going shopping?
As soon as I serve His Majesty's lunch. He's dining at the pool today. Where's Barney?
Oh, he's trying on his gear.
Gear?
That's right. He's going to practice spear fishing in the pool.
Spear fishing?
Wilma!
Oh, I'll be right back. I've got to feed the fish. Where do you want it, Fred?
Just set it down where I can reach it.
And remember, if you sink, don't let my best dishes go down with the ship. Barney, it's you.
Did my spearfishing outfit scare you?
Out of my wits.
However, the powers that be decided that Foray wasn't quite the right fit for Betty, and Bea Benaderet ended up getting the role. Foray recalled, "Dawes played both Fred Flintstone and Barney, and I played Betty. They submitted our tape, but apparently whoever was in charge, the network or someone, turned down both Dawes and me. I was terribly disappointed, and when my agent talked to Joe Barbera, he said they wouldn't even let me come in and retest for the part or any of the others. Joe was extremely thoughtful, though, and said he felt very bad. He asked my agent if I would come and do some other things for them. I was so upset, I said I would not and didn't want to go through that again. I do remember being terribly disappointed at not getting to play Betty." A reminder to us all that even the greats get turned down and go through disappointments. It's what you do next that matters. And June Foray certainly didn't let this disappointment bring her down for too long. Despite not landing the role of Betty Rubble in 1959, that very same year, she did go on to land some of her best remembered roles. Most notably, Jay Ward hired her to star in his animation Rocky and His Friends, later called The Bullwinkle Show, in which Foray voiced Rocky Squirrel and Natasha Fatale, as well as a long list of additional characters.
I had never heard of Jay Ward before. My agent called and said, "You know, there's a fellow in town who wants to do a series, and he has an idea, and he wants to take you to lunch." By this time, I guess I was well known because I had been doing all the Warner Brothers and Disney films. And so we met at the Tail of the Cock, which was a lovely restaurant on La Cienega Boulevard in West Los Angeles. And so I arrived at the Tail of the Cock, and there were two men sitting at the table. The maitre d' brought me over to the table, and I saw this very congenial man with glasses and a handlebar mustache, and a taller man, very genial, and they were Jay Ward and Bill Scott, and they were having martinis, and they said, "Have a martini," and I said, "No, I really don't drink at noon. I'd rather not." And they started telling me about the idea of a moose and a squirrel, and I thought the idea was kind of cockeyed. They were the only anthropomorphic animals who were talking to real people. And so they said, "Oh, come on, have a martini." Well, after the first martini, I thought, it's not such a bad idea. After the second one, I thought it was absolutely sensational, which it turned out was. But we did a demo the following week, and he said, "You're Rocky the Squirrel." And I said, "Well, what kind of a voice do you want?" He said, "Well, an all-American Boy Scout squirrel." So that's what I did, with a little hubris, and sometimes he became a little bit petulant with Bullwinkle, but always doing well. He wanted to save the world, and so did Bullwinkle. So I said, "Well, what about Natasha the spy?" And they said, "Don't do Russian, do her continental accent, because we don't want no problems with Russia." This was during the Cold War. So I did sort of a continental accent for Natasha. And Boris was the same way. They are from Pennsylvania, not Russia, darling.
This was not the only major memorable production that came Foray's way in 1959. And it wasn't exclusively animation that she was voicing. Toy company Mattel also came knocking. Mattel, whose name for many these days may be synonymous with brands like Hot Wheels, Uno and Barbie, was busy working on another doll back in the late 50s. That doll was Chatty Cathy, a pull-string talking doll who could say 11 different phrases.
Oh, Chatty Cathy, you're Mattel's famous talking doll. We pull the rings, and you say 11 different things.
Let's play house. Please change my dress.
We can change your dresses now, goodness knows. Now you've got a wardrobe full of pretty clothes. For nursery school, you're crisp and cool. For summer, there's a playtime set. In winter, brr, your collar's fur. In a coat as cute as you can get.
I love you.
You love your mamas, and they love you sleepy time pajamas.
Just pull the ring. You never know what she'll say next.
Tell me a story.
The only story now left to tell is that Chatty Cathy's made by Mattel.
You'll find Chatty Cathy and her costume sets wherever toys are sold.
You can tell it's Mattel, it's swell.
To a modern audience, it has a slightly unsettling air to it. But it seems it is not only modern audiences who feel that way. This gig, voicing Chatty Cathy, led to Foray eerily also voicing Talky Tina, an evil doll who appeared in an episode of The Twilight Zone in 1963.
She's alive, Daddy, and her name is Talky Tina. My name is Talky Tina, and I love you very much.
Will you shut that thing off?
My name is Talky Tina, and I think I could even hate you. My name is Talky Tina, and you'll be sorry. Be a good girl, Tina, and eat your supper.
Eat your own supper, Christy.
My name is Talky Tina, and I'm beginning to hate you.
My name is Eric Strader, and I'm going to get rid of you.
You wouldn't dare.
Huh?
Oh!
This role is considered by many to be amongst June Foray's best work. While Foray regularly demonstrated her range in creating unique voices for numerous characters, her role as Talky Tina proved that she could also perform a range of genres too.
My name is Talky Tina. And you'd better be nice to me.
The 60s was another busy decade for Foray, voicing characters and productions we're still familiar with today, such as Jerry of Tom and Jerry fame, and Dorothy in the animated version of The Wizard of Oz, titled Off to See the Wizard. But it was not only recording sessions that kept her busy. In the 1960s, Foray began dedicating herself to advocating and promoting the status of animation. She was one of the founding members of ASIFA Hollywood, a non-profit organization that promotes the art and craft of animation. Continuing to advocate for animation in the 1970s and enhancing ASIFA Hollywood, Foray came up with the idea of an award specifically for acknowledging excellence in the field of animation. This idea came to fruition in 1972 and was the Annie Awards.
I said to Nick Basusto, who is the son of Stephen Basusto, who owned UPA, he was president, and I said, Nick, I think it's a good idea. They have the Grammys, they have the Tonys, they have the Oscars. Why don't we have an animation, some kind of an award? It'll never work. I said, do you mind if I try? He said, go ahead. What have we got to lose? So in November of 72, I called all the animators. I wrote a bulletin, and I said, how about an animation award? We'll call it the Animation Award. And my husband said, look, it's Grammy, Tony, call it the Annie. So my husband, Hobart Donovan, he was a screenwriter, so I called it the Annies. They didn't think anyone would show up, and you know what? 400 people showed up the first time.
Still hosted by ASIFA Hollywood today, the Annie Awards covers 37 categories, including Best Animated Feature, Outstanding Animated Effects, and Outstanding Voice Acting. In the world of animation, the Annie Awards are considered to be the highest honour of awards. So many of Foray's achievements were wrapped up in the world of animation, whether it was starring in popular animations, advocating internationally for increased recognition of the art, creating an entire awards ceremony. But in 1973, she raised her voice to advocate for a separate issue, one which put her on the FBI's radar.
There's one great problem that rightly concerns every one of us, and that is, as you know, rising prices, and especially rising food prices.
In an attempt to deal with spiralling inflation during the early 70s, President Nixon imposed freezes on the prices of food and gas, measures which proved to be ineffective and politically catastrophic. One notable issue that drew the public's ire was the freezing of meat prices and led to boycotts. June Foray was one of the principal organisers of the boycotts, which led to her being added to Nixon's enemy list.
In 73, you appeared on Nixon's enemies list.
Yes, I did. Well, Nixon didn't like anybody who opposed him, obviously. A friend of mine called, and I had read it in the paper, that some women in either Connecticut or Massachusetts were boycotting meat because meat prices were so high. So she said, why don't we start it? So I thought, well, why not? Charles Osgood called. And he said, Miss Foray, did you know that Richard Nixon has put a ceiling on meat? And I said, no, I didn't. It was 5 o'clock in the morning here. And he said, well, he did. Will you still boycott? And here this was, just a few days before the boycott, which was April 1st of 73. And I said, well, we're still going to boycott. And that's when all hell broke loose. I was called to Washington, D.C., excuse me, to testify before the Joint Economic Committee, which I did. And so we conducted a thing at the I guess it was the halls of Congress. Thousands of people showed up. We got fan letters and calls from everybody in the country. People started, it was Fight Inflation Together, and people started forming their own groups down south, in the north, northeast, here, Middle West, every place. And Nixon was furious. And after a while, I heard that Nixon put me on his mud list, and I was audited for 10 years. 10 whole years. I was finally going to sue the IRS because my mother had doctor bills, and she was ill at the time. And I paid for her doctor bills. And they said, does she live with you? And I said, no, she's living in a retirement place. And they said, well, she didn't, you can't take that off. And I fly first class. They wouldn't allow me. They said, you could have flown economy, and they made me pay the difference between economy and first class. I mean, little niggling things for 10 years. He's over, darling.
Her voiceover work never let up, though. Throughout the 70s, she worked on a huge amount of animation projects, extensively for Chuck Jones Productions and Warner Brothers, which continued into the 80s. In the 80s, from 1981 to 1989, she worked on The Smurfs, playing Jokey Smurf alongside various other characters throughout the series. Other memorable series that she worked on during this time include DuckTales and Adventures of the Gummy Bears. In the 90s, she worked on the likes of Garfield and Friends and All New Dennis the Menace. In 1995, ASIFA Hollywood, who Foray had worked alongside for decades at this point, established the June Foray Award to be bestowed upon people who made a significant and benevolent or charitable impact on the art and industry of animation. Fittingly, the first winner was June Foray herself. Then, in 1998, Foray made a return to Disney, voicing yet another grandma. This time, she lent her voice to Grandmother Fa in Mulan, which she returned to several times over the next few years for various Mulan video games and the sequel, Mulan 2.
I think it's going well, don't you?
At the turn of the millennium, in 2000, Foray was awarded a Hollywood Star of Fame. In fact, it was Chuck Jones, the iconic animator who Foray worked with extensively over the years, who recommended her for a star. Naturally, given the time that Foray worked in animation, her name is arguably sometimes overshadowed and definitely compared to that of Mel Blanc. However, on that matter, Chuck Jones said, June Foray is not the female Mel Blanc. Mel Blanc was the male June Foray. Another achievement came to fruition not long after. Thanks to Foray lobbying for decades, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences established the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. Shrek won the very first one in 2002. In 2012, at the age of 94, Foray won an Emmy for being an outstanding performer in an animated program for her role in The Garfield Show as Mrs. Cauldron. At the time, that made her the oldest performer ever to win an Emmy, until Dick Van Dyke recently took that title, winning his Emmy in 2024 at the age of 98. June Foray's life and legacy reads as the ultimate dedication to animation. Her groundbreaking career achievements made her the legend that she is in the voiceover world. But more than that, she ensured recognition and dignity to all those in the animation industry, an industry that is still continuing to grow year on year. Following her death in 2017, just a few months shy of her 100th birthday, the tributes poured in, listing the hundreds of characters she voiced, the awards she won, her advocacy efforts, and tales of the lives she touched. ASIFA Hollywood beautifully celebrated her life, saying, "She was one of a kind, a trailblazer, a great talent, and a truly wonderful person." Thank you very much for watching this episode of VoiceOver Histories. If you enjoyed it, consider giving it a like, maybe sharing it, and maybe subscribing to the channel so you keep up to date on the next episode. Your support is massively appreciated. Until next time, bye-bye.